I noticed quite early that anything that I want to remember, I need to go over in my mind several times. There was nothing that I could remember just by looking at it in one glance. That's not the case now anymore, but it was initially, and we have to start somewhere. This could be a clue for people struggling with memory in general. Basically, observe any detail you can and repeat it. And I don't mean play it again, I mean repeat it in your mind. There's a big difference. When you play, very often the thinking and the learning part is switched off. So let me show you by example. Here's a little piece. Okay, so what do we see here? We see it's in G minor, we see the left hand starts, it's a 2-2 bar, and it starts on G and then D, so there's a fifth. These are already details that we're looking at. And I'm just looking at the first line for now. So the right hand starts like this. And we can look at more details. For example, a typical thing that might happen is that you forget on which note it starts. In fact, I think that happened in my demo video. So what can we do? We can look at where exactly the right hand starts relative to the left hand. We know it's in G minor. We will have to remember something outright, such as that it starts on this G. But the right hand starts one note and 2 octaves higher. Starting in the wrong octave is also a common problem. Then it moves up a fourth to the D, which is the same note that the left hand plays as a second note, which then has to go up a fifth. Look at all the details I'm thinking about. And now you can think these things through. And in fact, pause the video and see how much of that do you actually still remember as facts, as intellectual facts, or just plain mental facts, rather than a playing problem. So if you're struggling with memory, it's probably because you're not going over it often enough in your mind. That was at least the case with me. The easier it is to sight read, the more time we have left to memorize it. Normally those things don't compete with each other, but we're trying to do this at the same time, so they do. Now, my sight reading has a lot of room for improvement. And in fact, I had a terrible fail recently with one of these pieces. Let me just show you. I'm actually afraid to demonstrate it. It was that bad. Let me just show you how it goes. I practiced it a lot, so I'm supposed to be able to do it now. Let's see. Oh, God. Okay, you see what the problem is. The left hand's jumping a lot, and I slipped there again. And the right hand's also running around, and it's doing some semi-chromatic passage work as well. If I can even sight read this, it takes all of my concentration to do so. In fact, just the jumping in the left hand without looking at my hands is very, very difficult for me. So that means while I'm playing it, I have no time to do what I suggested earlier, which is go over something in your mind again. So obviously improving sight reading would improve this challenge as well. Try to grasp the essence of the piece first and its overall structure. What is the essence of a piece? That's what you would whistle to yourself or hum to yourself. Nearly always the melody, by the way. And you can do this much faster than you need to play it, and in fact you should when you're trying to learn it, because it's easier to understand then, especially if it's a slow piece. But the rhythm is absolutely crucial. You must always try and get that accurately in your mind as soon as possible. In a way, the melody is the essence of a piece, and rhythm is the essence of a melody. So let's take a look at an example. Okay, so here the structure is quite easy to grasp. That's one thing I like about these pieces. We have a sort of an introductory section which comes back at the end as a da capo, and it has an upbeat. 4 bars, and then the main theme starts, which is another 4 bars with a response of 4 bars after that. So it's an 8-beat phrase. It repeats then, so those 4 bars come again, and then we have a different answer. And then the introductory section comes again at the end. So how do I think through this? I'd like to count bars rather than beats. That gives you a much broader perspective of what's going on. So the opening section would be and 1, 2, 3, 4. The and is the upbeat here. I can also go and A, 2, 3, 4. A referring to the opening section. Then comes the main theme. There will be and B, 2, 3, 4. The response will be 5, 6, 7, 8. Then it repeats and B, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. So a very quick way of thinking through this piece would be and A2, 3, 4, and B2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and B2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12, and A2, 3, 4. That's what's really going on here. The next step is look at the melody. That's the top voice here. So it's, well, I'm not going to play it because we want to think through it. So we want to do that much faster. So it's da 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 da. In fact, if I'm just doing it in my mind, I do it even faster than that. This is lento, by the way, so it's way too fast, and we don't want to play it like that. But you can understand this way we just grasp what's happening everywhere much more effectively. And all the other things, the details, the accompaniment tends to fall into place much more easily when you understand this basic material. In fact, when you know the melody of a piece and the structure, you basically know the piece actually. Sometimes you can even guess how the accompaniment might go. And you know how musicians who are more experienced, they always know where they are in a bar. They don't have to count unless it's something really strange. You just feel where you are in a bar. Every beat sort of has its own weight to it. You can develop exactly that for phrases and sections as well by counting bars rather than beats. Now let me show you an example where I failed to do that and paid the price for it. So this is a slightly longer piece. What happened when I tried to play from memory the first time is I skipped the second theme. Interestingly, when I played the recap, then I did play it when it came then. And then I also remembered, wait a sec, you were supposed to play that in the exposition as well. And what's really interesting is I knew exactly what to play and how to play it. It wasn't difficult. I'd remembered everything about it, except that it existed. And this happened because I wasn't thinking in terms of the broader structure of the piece. I was simply going through it thinking, now comes this bit, and now comes that bit, and now comes this bit, hoping that raw memory will do the work for me and then I'll remember them all. Well, it didn't. It's a bit like a beginner will often think, well, now comes this note and that note and this note. And you can see why this is actually a much greater workload for your memory and for your mind in general than understanding what you're doing. As an analogy, imagine remembering a sentence like, baby husky is telling you to not use so much pedal. And then you would picture something like this. Now imagine you had to just remember the letters one by one. B, A, B, Y, etc. That is much, much more work. So as you can see, the beginner's way of doing things often requires much more mental effort. And it's not beginner or advanced as a binary thing. We're all on a spectrum, and moving along that spectrum frees you up. It frees up your mind. Notice how all of these things are starting to point in a particular direction, namely more efficient learning, more efficient practicing, and developing good habits. Stick around for more. Okay, this was the biggest one. Most of the memorization seems to take place in the initial scan. So when I cut out the sight reading entirely and just left myself as much time as I liked to memorize it before trying to play it, I noticed a very significant improvement, more than anything else I tried. This is also a very well-known practice technique called visualization. Very quick how-to. You basically take the score and you try to learn it as much as you can from the score, imagining yourself playing it. Again, with as much detail as possible. How it sounds, how it feels to play, how it feels to grasp the intervals, where you would have to jump, everything. I also talk about this in another context where I do a half visualization where it comes to securing pieces. It's very useful for that as well. After doing this for a while, I noticed to my surprise how suddenly certain things were just effortlessly in my memory, which wouldn't have been there before, just 1 or 2 weeks earlier. It was really quite interesting because it's like an upgrade to your mind, and suddenly things worked out that didn't work out. And I didn't believe it at first. I thought, oh, well, that was just a lucky guess, but it kept happening. So I realized, no, actually, your memory has just improved. So this was by far the biggest step forward in the shortest amount of time. I recommend anyone to try that for any reason, not just for this ridiculous challenge. Now, I reckon this is probably the most useful part of the video because it talks about how this improved other things in my piano playing. Well, one thing I noticed was that each new attempt at a piece yields far greater improvement than it used to. So whether I'm sight reading or whether I'm playing from memory, the difference is greater now. Okay, let's try this out with an example. I'm going to just play a piece. I'm not going to try to memorize it, and then see how much better it goes. Okay. I'll just do the first half. Now let's try this again. Notice it's just a huge difference. You know when you play through a piece and it just seems to go from your eyes to your hands and it's not going in your mind at all, and when you try to play it again it hasn't improved in the slightest little bit. Well, that's just gone. Whenever I have any contact with a piece now, however briefly, it's like a record button is pressed. Something seems to get edged into memory every time. Okay, so let's try this out in practice. It's always harder on camera. I'm just going to take the next piece here, the first half only, and I'm only going to sight read it without any attempt to memorize it. And then we see if I remember anything and how much. Okay. Okay. I'm nervous again. What was the first note? It's D major and it goes on and up. Okay, I think I've got it. No, it's got to be F sharp. It's got to be F sharp. I'm just going to assume it's F sharp. Somehow it winds up on D. Okay, so didn't go that well, but given that I wasn't trying to memorize it, that's not too bad, I think. And this wasn't how I used to play the piano. I used to often wind up in this read-only mode I keep talking about. We all know we're supposed to be practicing more efficiently, but in my experience, that's actually very hard to implement for anyone. And this challenge, well, it just removes even the possibility of practicing inefficiently because you can't use repeats. And so you can't do this sort of mindless, repetitive generation of raw habit to learn a piece. This is far more effective than just trying to discipline yourself to practice efficiently, because often people don't even know what that really means. Many people have never practiced efficiently. They don't know what their mind's supposed to be thinking while they're learning something. In fact, often they're not thinking at all, they're just playing. And interestingly, playing does seem to stand in the way of learning. Okay, let's try something else. I'm just going to take the next in this book of Chani exercises, and I'm just going to memorize it as fast as I can and then try and play it. Okay. Okay, let's see if it works. I'll take it a little slower. Okay, so I basically learned that in about 10 to 20 seconds and then played it from memory. And I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. And it wasn't talent, it was experience. In fact, to the extent that talent helped, it's only because talent helps you get experience faster. It's not the reason you can or can't do it. The first thing I looked at was the right hand. I could see very quickly this is a triad which has this 3, 5, 1, 3, and I don't mean fingers, I mean the harmony notes. So third harmony note, fifth harmony note. The same thing in F major, which is the subdominant, nothing surprising here. Then it goes to the diminished chord, which I'm expecting might wind up being a dominant seventh. And then we have a very normal cadence. That's probably the hardest part to remember actually, because it could have gone slightly differently. The left hand is a rising pattern of 4, but the whole thing is falling and is going clearly along the scale. So I see the first note is down the major scale, seemingly without interruption, and I spotted that pretty quickly until the cadence at the end again, where I have to concentrate a bit more to remember it. Now, the problem with the left hand is it's sort of semi-chromatic, but I know this pattern, that's why I could do it. Half of this was what I'd call smart guessing. It's chromatic whenever, well, it's going down in thirds actually. If you take the first and the last note of those 4 notes, it's doing this. along the major scale. And now that is telling you whether it's chromatic or whether there's a whole tone step. So when there's a major third, like here, it has to have a whole tone step. And I know nearly always in this kind of pattern, it starts with a whole tone step. It wouldn't do this. It goes like this. And the next one, when it's a minor third, then it's completely chromatic. And then the next one's a major third again. Nonsense, sorry, it's a minor third. So it's chromatic. Then we have a major third. We have... So I didn't look at all of those details to confirm if they're true. I didn't have time for that. I couldn't see them all in that time. So this was what you'd call just experienced or educated guessing. We can see later if it turned out to be true, but this is Chani, so it's unlikely to deviate in that way. If I hadn't known this pattern from other exercises like this, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Not a chance. I'd have had to rely on my memory to do the brute force heavy lifting. It would have to remember when the whole tone steps and semitone steps are and things like that, which is just too much. I can't do that. Not this brain. Not happening. In fact, having a super-powered brain that can do such things might even be a hindrance, because these sort of skills, this kind of experience, in the long run, I think is always going to be better than just relying on brute force memory horsepower. Okay, so how do we get there? If we encounter a pattern like this and we're not familiar with it, we don't just practice it to be able to play it. We want to practice it in a way so that ideally we never have to practice it again. That's quite a different kind of practicing, and you're not going to like it. Specifically, we must get it to feel easy in every key. Both hands. Hands separately, hands at different intervals. So not just... So maybe this... Things like that. And going in different directions and things like that. You see, this is a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. And if you practice this way, after a while you begin to notice how things like this start to enter your working vocabulary. They start to be something that is just at your disposal without having to think, without having to practice. And we want as much of that in our working vocabulary as possible. The bad news is it takes a lot of time, and you have to decide which patterns are worth doing this with, because you can't do it with everything. The good news is you're practicing everything at the same time, whether it's improvisation, sight reading, playing from memory, repertoire, it doesn't matter. You're practicing everything. You're practicing all repertoire in a way. It's a kind of generalized practicing as opposed to just learning specific pieces. It's a little bit like learning a language, learning to talk fluently, as opposed to just learning to recite poems accurately. So what do we do with pieces that are strange and complicated in a way that we can't grasp, or maybe they just don't have any structure, maybe they just really random stuff? And, well, this is going to be probably the biggest problem with this challenge. Nevertheless, first of all, understanding structure better will even help when there isn't one, because deviations stand out more. That's not very satisfying, I know. But we can also find structure even if there isn't one. It doesn't matter. It's like finding pictures in the clouds in a way. If you find some meaning in it, then it has that meaning. And if it helps you learn it, well, so be it. One specific thing, for example, that people often don't think about, which I find helps, or used to help me a lot, is combinations of black and white keys. I just recently had this example. Someone had to try and remember, the opening of the famous, Nocturne. The first two chords in the left hand up here are on E flat major, first inversion, if you reach for both of them at the same time. And then it moves to this diminished chord. And it's actually a diminished seventh, but never mind. And you can look at the combination of black keys. First we have outside white keys, inside black keys, and then it swaps. And the black keys move inward. They go from here to the white keys, and the outside keys, they go up. So they just exchange that with each other. Now this sounds like a really primitive way of remembering something, but well, if it helps, then it helps. And if you've got nothing else to hold on to, then well, you have to use that. So things like this are no doubt going to help, and maybe one can practice them more consciously. We'll have to see. I've often found myself in the state where I know something from memory, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be able to do, but I can't play it fluently. I have to stop and think. And we just had that a little bit with the Chani exercise that I did. I had no doubt, except for the end, I was a little bit unsure, but I generally had no doubt how it goes, except my hand still couldn't play it at the speed that it goes, or even at the speed that I wanted to play it at. So the problem here is fluency. And how do we get fluency? Well, we have to think in bigger structures. It's chunking, basically. And more consciously thinking ahead. So chunking and thinking ahead go hand in hand. You can't think ahead if what you're doing now takes too much concentration. So what you're doing now has to be easier. And that brings us back to what I was talking about earlier, where you learn patterns to make them more easily available to you. But I also noticed that often it's just a very specific detail that made all the difference. Like think a few beats ahead, left hand go down to this F sharp, something very small like that. It made the difference between being able to play it fluently or not. So there's probably a lot to be learned about how to organize our thoughts and how to plan them, when to think about what while we're playing. No doubt practicing is to a great extent about that. So how do we practice this? Well, take something you're playing, preferably something you're learning, but this might also work if you already know what you're doing. And play it slower and make a conscious effort to imagine yourself playing what's coming next while still playing this one thing. So the visualization we talked about earlier, it's doing that, but you're still playing the previous passage. And you can tell you're doing it right when your hands want to keep catching up. You're speeding up all the time, and it's very hard to maintain that slow tempo. In this exercise, slower equals harder. So even when you're playing slower, the technical challenge diminishes, the mental challenge grows. Okay, thanks for sitting through all this, all the 2 or 3 people of you that are still left. And I'll see you next time. Take care.